Let me tell you what's happening right now in the mind of the avoidant who thought they had you figured out. They thought they could do what they've always done. Pull back, go cold, create just enough distance to feel safe while keeping you just available enough to return to when they felt like it. They thought they were running the same play they've run a dozen times before. The slow fade, the strategic silence, the manufacturing of ambiguity while keeping all the options open on their side. They thought you'd do what you always did: wait, reach, send the message that said you were still there, show up in their orbit just available enough to remind them that the connection was still on the table. They had a model for how you behaved, and that model told them, this person doesn't leave, this person stays, this person cares enough to absorb whatever I give them and still come back. They were wrong, and I want you to understand why that miscalculation matters, not just for them, but for what it tells you about yourself and about the dynamic you've been operating in. Because here's what actually happened. While they were running their play, while they were going distant and managing the connection from behind glass, you were changing. You were growing. You were developing the one quality that their entire system is designed to prevent you from having: genuine self-possession. And the moment that quality became real in you, the play stopped working. The equation they had for you stopped adding up. And everything they thought was settled, your availability, your patience, your willingness to absorb the distance, turned out to be contingent on a version of you that no longer exists. That is the backfire. That is what they're dealing with right now. The version of you they planned for didn't show up. A different version did. And they are not prepared for that version. Today we're going to talk about why this happens, what it means, and what to do with the position you're now in. The plot. What they actually thought was happening. To understand the backfire, you need to understand the plot. Avoidants don't consciously strategize most of the time. I want to be clear about that. They're not sitting in a room drawing up plans for how to manage your emotions. But their attachment system has developed a set of reliable patterns for managing intimacy. And those patterns function as a kind of predictive model for how close relationships work. The model says, I create distance when I feel threatened by closeness. The other person pursues when I create distance. I regulate through the pursuit cycle. The distance I need to feel safe is maintained because the other person is always available when I choose to come back. That model has probably worked for them before. Multiple times, possibly. They've been in the dynamic where the other person absorbed the withdrawal and remained available, and the avoidant could cycle indefinitely. They've had relationships where the other person's continuous investment in the connection, their reaching, their messaging, their expressions of care and availability, functioned as the stable backdrop against which the avoidant could manage their anxiety about closeness. They were running that model with you. They had reason to believe it would work. You had, up to a certain point, behaved in ways consistent with the model's predictions. You had reached. You had been warm. You had been present. And all of that created in the avoidance system a reliable expectation. This is how this person behaves. This is what I can count on from them. The expectation was the vulnerability, because expectations set up the condition for their own surprise. They expected the version of you that they had successfully modeled. What they got instead was the version of you that exists on the other side of the work you've been doing, the version that decided that modeling your behavior for their comfort was finished. And when that expectation met that reality, the whole plan, the one that wasn't even consciously articulated but was operating in the background of every choice they made, collapsed. Let me be very specific about what it feels like from the avoidance side when this happens, because understanding it helps you see how significant the shift is. What it feels like when the plot backfires from inside the avoidance system. When an avoidance predictive model for another person's behavior fails, the experience isn't like losing a chess piece. It's more fundamental than that. The model wasn't just a tactical plan. It was a psychological organization of the relationship. It told them what to expect. It told them what was safe and what wasn't, what was predictable and what wasn't, where they stood and what they could count on. The model provided stability within the instability of their own approach avoidance conflict. When the model fails, when you stop behaving according to its predictions, that stability disappears. The avoidant no longer knows what to expect from you. And not knowing what to expect from you is a fundamentally different experience from the comfortable management of a relationship where you are predictably available. The first thing they notice is the absence. The ambient warmth and availability that was always there, that they had ceased to actively notice because it was as reliable as furniture, is suddenly not there. And its absence has a quality that's harder to ignore than the absence of something they were actively tracking. It's the quality of an unexpected silence where there was always sound. Something shifted that they didn't anticipate shifting, and that unexpectedness is what produces the alarm that ordinary withdrawal doesn't. The second thing they notice is something that attachment researchers would call object constancy disruption. Their internal representation of you, the reliable mental image of who you are and how you behave and what you feel about them, has become inaccurate. The image says you reach for them, the reality says you're not reaching. The image says you're available. The reality says you've genuinely gone somewhere else. The gap between the image and the reality is disorienting in a way that the avoidant is not practiced at managing, because their management strategies were all built around the model working correctly. The third thing they notice, and this is the one that produces what looks from the outside like the avoidant waking up, is the surfacing of what was always being suppressed, the genuine feelings about you. The real value they placed on the connection, the specific qualities of you that their deactivating strategies had been minimizing. These feelings surface into the gap created by the failed prediction. The strategy was calibrated to manage against your pursuit. Without the pursuit to manage against, the strategy has reduced load, and with reduced load, the suppressed material finds its way up. This is the moment of shock, not always dramatic, sometimes quiet, but genuinely disorienting. The person they thought they had figured out turns out to be someone they didn't fully account for, and the feelings they thought they were successfully managing turn out to have been waiting for exactly this. Why are you changing is the move that changes everything. Most of what you'll find when you look for advice about avoidant attachment is focused on what to do to the avoidant, what to say, how to approach, how to create the right conditions, how to behave in a way that doesn't trigger their withdrawal. The focus is almost entirely on managing their system through your behavior. This video is doing something different. The emphasis here isn't on what you do to them, it's on what you do for yourself. Because the backfire we're discussing doesn't happen because you deployed a tactic. It happens because you actually changed. It happens because the version of you that was calibrating to their system, adjusting, accommodating, reaching, staying available, developed enough of its own center to stop doing that. And that change, happening genuinely in you, produced a shift in the dynamic that nothing you could have done tactically would have produced. This is the most important thing I can tell you about this dynamic. You cannot produce this shift by performing it. The avoidance nervous system, which is highly calibrated for detecting authenticity versus performance, because it spent years learning to read beneath the surface behavior of caregivers whose stated messages didn't match their actual emotional availability, will not be genuinely affected by performed transformation. It will see through it. It will register. This person is trying to produce a response. This person is still organized around me. The strategy has changed, but the underlying energy hasn't. What affects the avoidant at a genuine level is genuine change in you, real disengagement in your own life, real development of self-possession that isn't contingent on their response. The kind of change that would be happening even if you'd never heard of this topic and were simply living your life and pursuing your own development. That's the change that the avoidance system can't manage its way through, because it's not a bid. It's not organized around them. It's you genuinely having moved on, and that genuine movement is the one thing that produces the experience in them that pursuit never could. Let me say this as plainly as possible. The backfire happens when you stop trying to make it happen. The moment you redirect your energy from managing the dynamic to building your own life is the moment the dynamic shifts. Not because you planned it that way, because that's how it works. Because genuine self-investment is the one energy that the avoidance system isn't built to deflect, because it isn't aimed at them. The specific things that have backfired and what they tell you. Let's get specific about the plot points that backfired, because understanding them helps you see what actually changed and why it matters. The first thing that backfired was their assumption that the connection would be waiting. They created distance and assumed you'd maintain availability while they were in it. You didn't. You took the distance seriously, not as a rejection to manage around, but as actual information about the relationship's current state, and you acted accordingly. You redirected your energy. You stopped treating the connection as the primary focus of your emotional investment. And when they eventually looked back, the availability they were counting on wasn't there. That's the first backfire. The safety net they were unconsciously banking on turned out to be gone. The second thing that backfired was their assumption that they could define the terms. Avoidance, in a working avoidant dynamic, are, in a functional sense, setting the terms of the relationship unilaterally. They determine the pace of intimacy. They determine the distance. They determine when closeness is okay and when it's too much. The other person is typically accommodating those terms, adjusting, calibrating, tolerating the asymmetry, because the connection matters enough to them. When you stopped accommodating, when you held your own terms instead, the unilateral dynamic ended. And that ending is the second backfire. They no longer have sole control of the relationship's terms. You have some of that back. And the experience of not having unilateral control is genuinely disorienting to a system that's been operating with it. The third thing that backfired was their assumption that your worth to them was fixed and understood. The deactivating strategies include a component that processes the other person as sufficiently understood, their value assessed, their qualities catalogued, their behavior predictable. This processing reduces the other person's aliveness in the avoidance experience. They become more of a known quantity, which is part of how the avoidant manages the anxiety of intimacy. When you changed, genuinely, you stopped being a known quantity. You became someone with a different quality of presence, a different energy, a different kind of aliveness than the one they'd catalogued. And the avoidance curiosity, which was the original engine of the attraction, reactivates in response to the genuinely new. That's the third backfire. You became interesting again in the most fundamental way, by becoming authentically more yourself. What to do with the position you're in now? So here you are. The plot has backfired. The avoidant is dealing with something they weren't prepared for. You've created not by strategy but by genuine growth, a situation that the usual management playbook doesn't fully address. What do you do with that? The first answer is, don't waste it by reverting. The most common thing that happens when people sense the shift in the dynamic, when they feel the avoidance renewed attention or the tentative reach back, is that the urgency that was finally quieted spikes back to full activation. The anxiety that had been calmed by redirecting into your own life floods back at the first signal that the avoidant might be willing to re-engage. And the response to that anxiety, the eagerness, the effusiveness, the implicit signal that you've been waiting and are now flooded with relief, immediately undoes the work. Because that response is the version of you the avoidant had calibrated against. The version they were planning around. The moment they see it, the plan is back on. The backfire unrealizes itself. Stay in the life you've been building. Respond to the avoidant's renewed attention with warmth but without urgency. Let them experience what it means to approach someone who genuinely has somewhere else to be. Someone who is glad to see them, but isn't reorganizing their whole world around the reconnection. Someone who has maintained the genuine self-possession that produced the shift in the first place. This is not coldness. This is the version of you that the backfire created. Keep being that person. The second answer is, let the situation develop on its own terms, not yours. The urgency to know where things stand, to get explicit clarity about intentions, to establish what this is or isn't, is understandable and premature. The avoidant who is genuinely dealing with the backfire is in their own processing phase. They are navigating the gap between the model they had for you and the reality of who you turned out to be. That processing takes time. Pushing for explicit commitment or conversation before the processing has run its course reactivates the avoidance defenses, shifts them from the position of someone navigating genuine feeling to someone being asked to perform commitment they're not ready to articulate. Let the warmth develop naturally. Let the connection rebuild at the pace it can sustain. And hold, at every step, the self-possessed, genuine, full version of yourself that made the backfire possible in the first place. What the backfire is actually about. The larger message the avoidance plan's backfiring because you changed isn't just a victory in a dynamic. It's a signal about who you are now and what you're capable of. It's proof of concept, evidence that the work you've been doing on yourself is real and has produced real change. The version of you that existed before this process began would have behaved according to the avoidance model. The version of you now doesn't. That change is permanent. Not contingent on how this particular situation resolves, not dependent on the avoidant making the right choice, the self-possession you've developed, the life you've invested in, the attachment work you've done on yourself. These belong to you. They'll be in the room with you in the next relationship and the one after that, whether this connection continues or doesn't. The avoidance shock at the backfire is information about you. It tells you that you're not who you were. It tells you that the pattern you were stuck in has actually broken, not because someone broke it for you, but because you grew out of it. That's the most durable kind of change. That's the kind that doesn't revert when circumstances improve. So yes, they're mad and shocked because everything they plotted has backfired. Good. Let them be. You have better things to invest in than managing their surprise. You have a life to keep building, a self to keep developing, a future to keep moving toward, with or without their participation. That's the work. Keep going. They never expected you to outlast their silence. Here's something the avoidant never truly believed was possible: that you could outlast their silence without losing yourself. That you could sit in the discomfort of their distance without collapsing into pursuit. That you could look at the empty space where their presence used to be and instead of rushing to fill it with your own anxiety, use it as space to grow in. They've run the silence play before. They know how it usually works. The other person gets uncomfortable. The other person gets anxious. The other person sends the message, makes the call, finds some reason to insert themselves back into the avoidance orbit because the uncertainty of the silence is more painful than the discomfort of reaching first. The silence is a known quantity. It does a reliable job. It creates just enough pressure on the other person to produce pursuit, which gives the avoidant both the confirmation that the person still cares and the fresh justification for continued distance. You broke the pattern. You outlasted it. Not easily. I'm not suggesting this was painless or that you sailed through without moments of wanting to reach, but you didn't reach. Or if you did reach in moments of weakness, you redirected when you caught yourself, and you kept redirecting. And the cumulative effect of all that redirecting, of all that choosing to invest in yourself instead of managing their silence, was that the silence stopped doing its job. It ran out of time before it ran out of you. This is not a small thing. Most people in your position don't outlast the silence. The attachment system's alarm is too loud, the urgency too real, the discomfort of not knowing too much. Most people reach before the silence does what you allowed it to do. Reveal, through its sustained absence of response from you, that the avoidance strategy had no backup plan for this exact scenario. Think about what it means that you outlasted it. It means you developed, through practice, a relationship with uncertainty that doesn't require it to be resolved. It means you developed, through the repeated act of not reaching, the muscle of genuine self-regulation. It means you discovered that the alarm, however loud, however urgent, is something you can sit with rather than something you must immediately respond to. That discovery changes you at a level deeper than the dynamic. It changes how you'll navigate every relationship that comes after, because you now know you can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing where you stand without it consuming you. The avoidant silence was supposed to put you back in the position of pursuit. Instead, it forged something in you that made you less likely to pursue. That is the most ironic backfire of them all. The version of you that showed up is not who they were managing. The avoidant has a mental model of you. Every relationship develops these. Internal representations of who the other person is, how they behave, what to expect from them. The avoidance model of you was built on the version of you that existed through the earlier phases of the dynamic. The version that was responsive to their distance, that adjusted to their pace, that showed care and availability in ways that, while genuine, also confirmed the avoidance expectation that they could manage the relationship's intensity by managing their own availability. The version of you that showed up after the silence isn't that person, not because you've become cold or unavailable, but because you've developed an internal stability that wasn't there before, a groundedness. A quality of having somewhere to be that isn't contingent on their participation. A way of carrying yourself in the relationship and outside of it that has a different weight to it than the version they'd modeled. Avoidants are exquisitely sensitive to this kind of shift. I've said this before in this video and it's worth saying again. Their attachment style developed in an environment where reading the emotional atmosphere beneath the surface behavior was a critical skill. They're not consciously analyzing you, but their system is registering the difference between who you were and who you are now. And the difference registers as something their deactivating strategies weren't built for. Their strategies were built for someone who needed them to stay. Someone whose emotional life was organized around the avoidance availability. Someone whose investment in the connection showed up as ongoing pursuit in response to their distance. The new version of you doesn't need them to stay in the way the old version did. Not because you don't care, you do care, genuinely, but because your caring is no longer organized primarily around managing their comfort and maintaining their availability. Your caring is now rooted in something you've built independently. And that rootedness changes the entire relational field. The avoidant is trying to work out who the person in front of them is now, how to approach them, what to do with the fact that the reliable patterns of the old dynamic aren't producing their expected results. They're recalibrating in real time. And while they're recalibrating, you have an opportunity not to run a new strategy, but to simply continue being the person you've become. Let them do the recalibrating. You just keep living the life. When they start reaching back, reading it correctly. At some point, if you've done the work genuinely enough and the connection had real substance, the avoidant is going to reach back. It may look tentative. It may look casual, almost as if they're testing whether the connection still has the quality they remember, without wanting to commit to acknowledging that they're testing it. It may look like a message that seems minor, but was sent in a moment when they didn't have to send anything, and the fact that they did says more than the content of the message. Reading these signals correctly is essential, and correct reading has two components that are both equally important. The first component is not underreading. This is where people with avoidant attachment of their own, or people who've overcorrected from anxious into defended, can miss real signals. The avoidance reach back will never look like the full-throated, explicit declaration of feeling that an anxiously attached person would offer. It will be quieter, more oblique, more deniable if things don't go well. But quiet and oblique isn't nothing. A tentative reach after genuine silence, from someone who never reaches unless they mean to, is significant. Underreading it as nothing, out of pride or self-protection or overcorrected detachment, misses the opening. The second component is not overreading. This is where anxiously attached people get into trouble. A single message becomes proof of everything. The tentative reach becomes a declaration of intent. The casual contact becomes confirmation that everything is going to be different. And the response to that overreading, the effusive warmth, the flood of relief, the implicit signal of how much you've been waiting, immediately recreates the dynamic the avoidant was just beginning to reassess. Overreading transforms you, in the space of one response, back into the version of you the avoidant had catalogued and learned to manage. Read it as what it is, a beginning, not a resolution, not a declaration, not a guarantee of anything, a tentative step in a direction that will require patience and genuine continued groundedness from you to develop into something worth having. Respond to it as a beginning, warmly, without urgency, with genuine presence but without the weight of everything you've been waiting for riding on the response. That quality of response, grounded, warm, unhurried, is the one that gives the avoidance cautious step the room it needs to become more. And it's the quality of response that's only possible from the person you've been becoming during the period of their silence, not from the person you were before, from the person who outlasted it. The bottom line, what this moment asks of you. The avoidant is shocked. Their plot backfired. The version of you they planned around didn't show up. The version that did is someone they're not sure how to manage. And that uncertainty in their system, the confusion of finding themselves caring about someone they didn't plan on caring about again, needing a connection they thought they'd successfully managed away, is the most honest experience they've had in this relationship. What this moment asks of you is not to manage it for them, not to ease their confusion by reverting to the familiar version they can work with. Not to rush the process toward clarity because clarity feels better than the uncertainty of a dynamic in flux. What it asks is to hold the position, to continue being the person whose self-possession created the backfire. To let the relationship develop, or not develop, at the pace that genuine change requires. And to keep your investment in your own life as the primary investment, not secondary to managing the dynamic or responsive to what the avoidant decides. You did the hard part. You grew. You changed. You outlasted the silence and became someone the strategy couldn't predict. Don't undo that now by handing them back the dynamic they were comfortable in. Keep building. Keep growing. Let the version of you that backfired their plot continue to exist and develop and live fully, whether this reconnection goes somewhere or not. That person, grounded, self-possessed, genuinely alive in their own life, is who you've been working to become. You've arrived. Stay there. What their shock is actually telling you about yourself. I want to spend some real time on this because it matters. The avoidance shock, the disruption to their predictive model, the confusion they're experiencing about who you are now and how to approach you, is information. And the information it's carrying is not primarily about them, it's about you. It tells you that you did the work. Not perfectly, not without moments of wanting to reach for them instead. But genuinely, The change that their shock is responding to isn't a performance. It's not a strategy that produced the appearance of growth without the substance. It's real growth, real development, real self-possession that didn't exist before this process and exists now because you built it. One choice at a time, over a period of days and weeks and maybe months in which you consistently chose yourself over the anxiety of the dynamic. That deserves acknowledgement, not from them. You don't need their shock to validate your growth, but from you to yourself, the internal acknowledgement of what you've actually done, what it took, what it cost, what it produced. That acknowledgement matters because it's part of solidifying the change, part of making it yours in a way that doesn't evaporate the next time the attachment system gets activated. Here's what you can know for certain about yourself now, based on what their shock reveals. You can tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into pursuit. You can redirect your energy away from someone who isn't showing up for you and toward your own life and development. You can sit with the discomfort of not knowing where you stand without that discomfort taking over. You can maintain self-possession in a dynamic that used to consume you. These are not small capacities. They are some of the most important emotional capacities a person can develop, and they make every other relationship you'll ever be in better. The avoidance shock is a mirror. Look at it clearly, see what it reflects. Not the avoidance confusion, their processing is their work. See what it says about you. See the person who created the situation by becoming more fully themselves. That person is who you've become, and that person is worth being for your own sake, entirely separate from whatever this dynamic produces from here. The story you get to tell yourself now. Stories matter. The story you've been telling yourself about this dynamic, about what it means that you got here, what it says about you that you got so invested in someone who couldn't fully show up, what the whole experience has been. That story has probably not been kind to you. I want to offer you a different one. You loved someone who had difficulty receiving love. You tried harder than most people would to reach something genuinely worth reaching. You gave generously from what you had. And at some point, you realized that giving more wasn't the answer, that the dynamic required something from you that no amount of giving could provide, and that the only move that was good for both of you was the one that required you to grow. So you grew. Not because someone gave you the roadmap or made it easy, not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because you understood, at some level, that your own development was more important than the outcome of this specific dynamic. And you did it. The growth was real, the change was real. The person you are now is different from the person you were before this started, in the specific ways that matter most. That is a story worth telling. Not a story of victory over the avoidant. That framing keeps you in the dynamic's orbit. A story of your own becoming. Of someone who walked through a genuinely difficult experience and came out on the other side more themselves than before. That's the story this experience has been generating, one choice at a time. The avoidance shock is a chapter in that story. Not the climax, not the resolution. A chapter, what happens next in the story depends on both of you. But what has already happened? The growth, the change, the backfire of their plot by the simple fact of your becoming, that's already written. Already real, already yours, regardless of what comes next. What genuine freedom looks like from here. Here's the thing about reaching the place you're in now. It has a specific quality that's worth identifying because it's easy to miss when you're still in the middle of it. The quality is this. You are genuinely free in relation to the avoidant in a way you weren't before. Not free in the sense of not caring. You still care. But free in the sense that their choices no longer determine your quality of life. Their decision to engage or not engage doesn't collapse your emotional world. Their response or non-response to your existence doesn't define your worth or your trajectory. The power they had over your experience, the power that comes from being the primary object of someone's emotional attention, has been redistributed back to where it belongs, to you, over your own experience. This freedom is the thing the avoidance shock is reacting to, even if they don't know that's what they're reacting to. The person who no longer needs them to show up in order to be okay is a genuinely different relational prospect than the person who did need that. The dynamic has shifted because the power has redistributed. And redistributed power, in a dynamic that was always running on one person having too much of it, changes everything. What you do with that freedom is up to you. You can use it to build the best version of your own life, which is the primary recommendation here. You can use it to engage in a potentially different version of this relationship from a place of genuine equality, if the avoidant demonstrates real capacity for change. You can use it to step away completely and invest yourself entirely in new contexts and new connections. All of these are valid uses of the freedom you've developed. What you should not do with it is give it back. Don't return to the position of having their choices determine your emotional state. Don't recenter your life around their availability. Don't trade the self-possession that created the backfire for the temporary relief of having the connection feel secure again. The security that comes from their renewed attention is not the security that comes from your own groundedness. Only one of those kinds of security is actually yours to keep. Keep the one that's yours. Let everything else develop from that foundation. You earned this position, stay in it. The last thing I want you to understand, there's one more thing about this dynamic that I want to make sure lands before we close, because it's the piece that will carry you through whatever happens next. The avoidance shock, the backfire of their plot, the surprise of encountering a version of you they didn't predict, all of that is a real and meaningful shift in the dynamic. But it is not by itself a resolution. It's a change in conditions. And like all changes in conditions, what matters is what both people build in those new conditions. The avoidant is dealing with their own processing, their own reckoning with what they suppressed, what they took for granted, what they didn't understand about themselves or about you, until the conditions that made comfortable suppression possible were removed. That reckoning belongs to them. Their growth from it belongs to them. Whether they have the capacity and the genuine desire to show up differently in what comes next, that is entirely their territory. Your territory is different. Your territory is the continuation of what you've already been doing, building the life, developing the self, maintaining the groundedness that created the backfire in the first place. Your territory is showing up as the more complete version of yourself, in whatever contexts present themselves. This one, or the next one, or the one after that. Your territory is holding your own standards clearly enough that you can recognize when a reconnection is genuinely offering something different and when it's offering the same dynamic with a warmer opening act. You've done the hard part. You've changed. The change is real. The person you are now is better equipped for relationships, for yourself, for the full range of your life than the person you were before this started. That's not consolation. That's the actual outcome. That's what the growth was for. The avoidance plans backfired. Everything they plotted stopped working the moment you stopped being the person they were plotting around. And you stopped being that person not because you chose to run a different play, but because you grew into someone for whom that play is no longer available. That's yours. Keep it, build from it. And wherever this dynamic goes from here, whether toward genuine reconnection on genuinely better terms, or toward a clean release and a full redirection of your energy into your own life, go there as the person you've become. Not the person who was waiting, the person who was building, the person who made the plot backfire just by becoming more fully themselves. That person has everything they need. The rest is just what happens next. A direct word about the emotions you're carrying right now. Let me speak directly to where you might actually be emotionally as you're engaging with this content. Because it's possible you're reading all of this about the backfire and the shift in the dynamic and the avoidance shock, and part of you is satisfied. This is what I worked towards. This is the shift I needed to happen. And part of you is still in pain, still grieving the version of the relationship that didn't work out, still carrying the weight of having given so much and having received so little in return. Still uncertain about what comes next, even with the shift that's happened. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. The growth and the grief, the self-possession and the longing, the genuine shift in your position and the genuine sadness about how long it took to get here and what it cost you in the meantime. You don't have to choose between them. You don't have to be entirely triumphant about the backfire in order for the backfire to be real and meaningful. You don't have to be entirely healed before you're allowed to engage with what comes next. You're a full human being who has been through something genuinely difficult, and the difficulty doesn't disappear because your position in the dynamic has improved. What I want you to hold on to is this. The difficulty was real and you navigated it. The cost was real and you paid it and came out the other side with something that's actually worth having. The grief is real and it's allowed to be there alongside the growth. The longing is real and it doesn't mean you've undone your progress. It means you're human and the thing you were hoping for with this person was worth hoping for. And the fact that it required you to become more fully yourself to have a chance at it, that's the honest cost of loving someone who has difficulty receiving love. That cost produced something, you, more fully, more yourself, more capable, more grounded, more free. The dynamic extracted something from you and gave you back a better version of yourself in return. Not a fair trade in the moment, but a real one. And the version of yourself you got back is who you're going to be in every relationship and every situation for the rest of your life. That's what the backfire actually gave you. Not the avoidance shock, not the dynamic shift. You, more fully than before. Carry that forward with you. It's the only thing that lasts. Remember, you don't need the avoidant to confirm your growth. You don't need them to acknowledge what you've done or to validate the shift that happened. The growth is real whether they acknowledge it or not. The backfire is real whether they ever fully understand what caused it or not. Your freedom is real whether they can perceive it from where they're standing or not. You know what changed. You know what you did to change it. You know who you are now compared to who you were. That internal knowledge, that private, genuine, personal understanding of your own development is the foundation everything else is built on. Guard it, tend to it, keep building from it. And if the avoidance shows up differently because of it, great. Let it be the beginning of something real. But if they don't, if this shift is the beginning of your life without this particular person in it, then what you've built is exactly what you need for that life too. Either way you win, not in the competitive sense, in the sense that your growth is real and it's yours and it serves you regardless of outcome. That's the truth about the backfire. That's why it matters. Not because their plans failed, but because in the process of their plans failing, you found yourself. And that finding is worth more than any single relationship outcome. Go live from that foundation. It's solid, it's real, and it belongs entirely to you.